Quote of the night from French President Macron, whose choice of English words to describe the wife of Australian Prime Minister Turnbull led to this.
You're welcome. Thank you and your delicious wife for your warm welcome. It's the perfect organization of this trip. Thanks to you and Lucy.
It's delicious.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It's been an amazing 24 hours, even by the action-packed standards of 2018. There's been a lot of drama in Washington. Last night, as you doubtless know, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani revealed on Sean Hannity's show that President Trump did, in fact, reimburse his lawyer Michael Cohen for payments Cohen made to porn star Stormy Daniels. That seemed like a major story at the time, but within hours, it wasn't even the biggest story of the day. NBC News reported that federal law enforcement had wiretapped Michael Cohen's phone and apparently recorded at least one conversation he'd had with the White House, presumably with the President of the United States. But then that story changed. NBC's new account claims that the FBI simply recorded the numbers that Cohen dialed and not the content of the calls he made. And that's where we are as of right now, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. One thing we know for sure is that NBC screwed up, and there's no surprise there, obviously. But that's pretty much all we can be certain of. If NBC's first story was wrong, why do we assume the second is right? We really don't know what the truth is, and we have no way of knowing. In the absence of honesty from our government, we're totally dependent upon leaks for our news, and many of those are dishonest. Michael Cohen, by the way, still doesn't know why his office was raided, and his phones and email were apparently monitored by the government because nobody in government will tell him, and they're not required to tell him. How Orwellian is that, by the way? Imagine if it happened to you. If one day armed men arrived at your office or your home and seized your phone, your computers, and your files at gunpoint, but never explained why they were doing it. And the next thing you knew, cable news anchors were calling you a criminal. Now, Michael Cohen certainly looks like a shady character, but so what? Shadiness is not a crime. The FBI can't destroy your life just because you talk like a character from The Sopranos or because you work for Donald Trump. Those are not felonies. Basic norms were violated here. Attorney-client privilege is an ancient and a vital concept. And by the way, so is privacy. The FBI bulldozed all of that. Let's hope they had a very good reason for doing it. The government better have evidence that Michael Cohen was doing something awful, putting lives at stake or betraying his country or something really beyond the pale in order to justify this. If it turns out that all of this was just about a financial settlement with some porn star, which, by the way, is a story that not a single American is honestly shocked by or threatened by, no matter what Anderson Cooper tells you. If that's all it's about, then what we're watching is a grotesque violation of civil liberties. And that would be a real crime, one with actual victims. Every American who believed in representative democracy, for example. James Kallstrom is a former assistant director of the FBI. He joins us tonight. Mr. Kallstrom, you spent your life at the FBI. You're a very, obviously, famous leader at the FBI. When you watch the last years, you've watched it unfold, how do you think the Bureau's doing?
Well, the leadership of the Bureau and the leadership of the department are doing well at all, Tucker. I mean, it's just outrageous. You know, I look back at some records and during the SNLs in the 80s and 90s, you remember that. You know, yes. Literally thousands of SNLs that went belly up, and a lot of corruption, a lot of criminality. Not one law firm in the United States, not one law firm was ever served with a search warrant for that whole period of time. And yet this little 4-person or 5-person law firm that just happens to be the law firm of the President of the United States is attacked by pen registers, by surveillance, by search warrants. And, you know, to get a search warrant from a federal judge, in the criminal side, you have to talk about a criminal act that's taking place, a criminal predicate. And on the national security side, for the FISA judge, you have to talk about the threat to national security and talk about yes. You know, why it's going to be affected negatively in both cases without these extraordinary measures. I think it's far-fetched. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but to see what kind of a predicate they could have possibly had in this case.
Well, so if it turns out that this really is all about a payment to a porn star, and I hate to say it, but let's be honest, it's just not a surprising story. Nobody voting in 2016 is going to be surprised by this. If it turns out that's really the predicate for this, what do you think of that?
And nor is it surprising that Bob Mueller would do something like this. It's Bob Mueller's
people.
Well, I mean, look at the history. Look how we went into Paul Manafort's house and had 4 o'clock in the morning. Here's a potential, if by worst cases, a white-collar crime stuff. And you go into a house at 4 or 5 in the morning with weapons shown. You drag a woman out of bed in her nightgown, and the children are, I assume, screaming, yelling around the house. I mean, that's just an outrage. We don't operate like that in the United States. If I was the head of the FBI, I would have not let the agents participate. Now, this is something that came from Mueller up to the U.S. Attorney in New York. And they apparently put together an affidavit, and I guess the FBI was involved with that, and that was presented to a federal judge. And when you go into a lawyer's office, you've got to be really careful. And the way it works today, you have really 2 teams of people. One team goes in and does the search. Another team kind of looks through the material to try to segment out anything that would be privilege. And in this case, the federal judge, who now has control over this case, has gone a step further and is turning all that material over to a senior federal judge, Barbara Jones, who's a fantastic judge, a good friend of mine over the years. And she'll decide, you know, what the U.S. government gets to see and what the U.S. government doesn't get to see.
Right. But you think, and I should just clear up for our audience who aren't familiar with your career, I wouldn't describe you as a soft-on-crime liberal at all. But you think, based on decades at the FBI, that what you're watching now is out of line. There's no precedent for it.
Tucker, I don't believe in kicking in doors unless there's a reason for it. And I don't believe for having outrageous search warrants, you know, unless there's a real bona fide reason. Is there a criminal predicate for this? I'd be surprised if there was. If it is, it's probably some concoction from some, you know, stupid intelligence contact. Or is it a national security predicate? I find that would be preposterous. You know, I just think these people are out of control. From the very time that Donald Trump was the nominee of the Republican Party, there has been a conspiracy, a fifth column, call it what you want, that has tried to stop him from getting elected, and number 2, stop his effective work for the people of this country. And look at the magnificent job he's done in the economic front, in the foreign relations front, in a year and a half. In my view, more than the last 3 presidents combined.
I'm awestruck that you're saying this, because you're not a cable news talking head, and any of our viewers who are not familiar with your career ought to go to Google and look it up. You speak with authority on this subject, and so I'm shocked by what you said and saddened, but I believe you because you are believable on this subject. Mr. Kallstrom, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. No, I don't have the facts, but that's my record. That's what I think is the situation, Tucker.
Well, you have perspective, that's for sure. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Danny Coulson is a former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Coulson, thank you for coming on. I want to ask you about Daniel Richman. And we're learning that James Comey, when he ran the FBI, hired a friend of his called Daniel Richman, who's a professor at Columbia, a lawyer, in a kind of gray area job as a crypto government employee, basically to do PR for him and to leak information he thought would be helpful to his reputation. You spent a long time at the FBI. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
I've never seen anything like that, Tucker, and I've talked to a number of former executives in the FBI, and neither have they. You know, this is not like a junior membership in the Garden Club. This is given a man who really has no job except to give some advice and do publicity for the director, getting a security clearance and access to the FBI building. That's really significant to me, and I think there's another issue here in the fact that this individual was the one that Comey leaked to and gave the memos to, and that didn't come up in Comey's hearings. That's troubling to me, and the fact that they did that. I would want an inquiry done. If I were back there, I'd be looking at that. How did this happen? Who generated it, and did the guy get a real background? Was it a FBI background or a name check or database check, or did they go out and really clear this guy? There's a lot of unanswered questions here, and it kind of reflects the way the director of the FBI then, James Comey, ran it.
Well, so since you served in the FBI under other directors, things were not done this way before?
No, I've never seen this. We hire contractors, and they're essential, and they're needed, and they get paid, and they're vetted, and they participate in a lot of really important things. But I've never seen anything like this, where it's an unpaid crony of the director of the FBI. That doesn't make any sense to me, and I just wish there was somebody back there that during that regime that would say, Director, this is not the way to go. Somebody that's not owing to him for a promotion or a transfer says, right, don't do this. This violates at least the look bad rule, and the FBI has an image, and I don't think that he promoted that. And bringing this man on board, I think that was foolhardy.
So, speaking of the way the public perceives the FBI, what do you make of Comey's book tour, where he's taken a series of very political positions? How does that affect the way citizens feel about your agency?
Well, it's troubling, and I think that his book tour and his comments, his book itself, reflects why he was not a successful director of the FBI. The book is entitled in part Higher Authority, and I think that he didn't respect the authority of our Constitution. And I think that it comes out loud and clear when he goes out and makes these outrageous statements. That wasn't a leak. He justified what he did. He ran the most weak, feckless investigation ever in the history of the FBI, and I think that reflects not on the FBI, reflects on him, not us.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate your perspective on that, since again...
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It's always fun.
Mark Penn was, for many years, one of the highest levels advisors to Hillary Clinton. He's the author of the new book, Microtrends Squared, and he joins us tonight. Mark, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
So, you wrote kind of an amazing piece the other day in The Hill, titled something like, Questions I Have for Robert Mueller. Tell us some of the questions that, if you could ask, you would.
Well, remember, Tucker, I spent a year working with President Clinton against Ken Starr and that effort. And I just
I remember very well.
I just find that was child's play to what's going on here. And I think that, well, Mueller has some questions about what the president was thinking when he fired Comey. Well, I certainly have some questions about what he was thinking when first he went to apply for the FBI job in the first place with Rosenstein, and then turns around the next day. Didn't he already have a plan when he turned around? Boy, when he put that team together and there wasn't a single Trump donor, what was he thinking then? And when he looked at these dossiers and discovered that there was no foundation here, how did he deal with that? And how does he justify, these kinds of really stormtrooper tactics? I think is perhaps not an exaggeration when you go guns drawn to political consultants, wiretaps all over the place over payments to porn stars. This thing has gotten out of control, and while he wants to question the president, it seems that no one can really question either Mueller or Comey or Rosenstein, and that is precisely the problem.
Yeah, it is the problem. And I hate to admit it, since I supported the Ken Starr independent counsel investigation, and I look back in shame because of that. But that was the case that the Clinton people made at the time. There's no oversight here, and that's a huge problem, and it turns out you were right about that. In your piece, you made reference to his behavior in Boston when he worked there in the Whitey Bulger case. Briefly summarize that, if you would, because I thought it was really interesting.
Well, really, the question, and I think Professor Dershowitz has really been out on this thing, that in the Bulger case, there were 4 innocent people in jail due to prosecutorial misconduct, and he was head of the office. And so you do not really find him in the legal cases, but that means he waited until the courts overturned things to release the people. And so what was he thinking when that was happening? How did he permit that? How did he permit these kinds of gross abuses? And how does he then supervise an investigation now that seems to be filled with them?
Mark Penn, again, you have authority on this subject, and so it's nice to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
I went through it once, and I hope America doesn't go through it again.
Yeah. Hillary never would have allowed this. She was too smart for this, there's no doubt. Thank you.
Thank you.
China has a plan in place to displace this country as the world's strongest power. A top expert on this subject will explain how that's working, and unfortunately it is working. And then we'll talk to Marco Rubio, who's taken a profound interest in this all of a sudden. It's an interesting conversation. Stay tuned. Well, if you watch cable news or read the Washington Post, you know America has only one enemy in the world. It's called Russia. But the truth may be more complicated than that. The biggest threat to this country is not Vladimir Putin. That's ludicrous. The biggest threat, obviously, is China. China spies on us more than any other country. It is behind the massive OPM hack carried out from 2012 through 2014. It has, of course, the world's largest population. It will soon have the world's largest economy. Its military is growing rapidly in strength. It even manufactures most of the fentanyl that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Americans assume that this country is on top and will be forever, but could we find ourselves overtaken before we know it, imminently even? Michael Pillsbury is the director for the Center for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute and one of the world's great experts on this exact subject. He's the author of the 100-Year Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. He joins us tonight. Mr. Pillsbury, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thank you.
So you've written, I think, the central book on this question, so we'll just stipulate that what you say is true, because I think it is obviously true. So the question, which is, China wants to displace the United States as the most powerful nation in the world. Why isn't our leadership, political, media, cultural, sounding the alarm on this? Because it's happening.
Well, there's lots of pretty good reasons. Lots of companies and individuals have made large amounts of money in China. I hate to be so crass about it, but I have a colleague who invested $200 million. 6 years later, he had $2 billion in return. That can be a pretty big motivator. Second, you have inertia. You have the opening by Kissinger and Nixon, the Bush family being very proud of their connections with China. You have this almost a strong effort 10 years ago to set up G2, America and China together would sort of rule the world. That was backed by Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Hank Paulson, and quite a few people feel very strongly that the U.S. and China together can kind of control the world. I've had admirals and generals tell me that they want to cooperate with the Chinese military. So this goodwill feeling of cooperation with China is the way to go. That's still very strong. I think that explains also why President Trump has a lot of pressure on him from the bureaucracy, from some in Congress, not all. Chuck Schumer, of all people, supports President Trump's tariffs, for example. But this momentum is still there. The third thing is what I would call intelligence failure. The U.S. intelligence community has been wrong about several major things from 1950 on, and it looks like understanding just how sophisticated China was going to be in ripping off our technology, jobs, influencing our political system, that seems to have been gotten wrong. I think the intelligence community is back on track now. They're doing very well, but that also caused a kind of a sluggishness in our response to China, I would say. Now we're much faster, though. Over the last 6 months or so, a great deal of change has taken place in the U.S. understanding of China.
I hope that's right. So back to something you said a second ago, and I've heard people say that we can kind of share the world stage, share management of the world with China.
Right.
Does China have any interest in sharing that with us?
You know, they turned us down. Several people made these offers of the so-called G2 plan. And the Chinese scholars who are allowed to talk about it in articles and books said, no, you know, we really don't want to be number two as a junior partner with America. So they're waiting for later when I think they'll be number one, unless we take a lot of steps to make it not happen. We've got to deny them technological supremacy. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've got to understand better how deeply embedded they are in our companies, in our social life, in our academic world. We really we had a luxury with the Russians of the Soviet Union was way over there. We didn't have much to do with them. They certainly didn't have any massive business enterprises with us. China is deeply inside us. And so we don't want to demonize them totally. We cause problems in our own political system. But we've got to be more aware of just how sophisticated they are.
Well, we're spending the next month on a special series on China, and I hope that you will come back, Michael Pillsbury, for that. Can't think of a more important topic. I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you. Well, China is clearly a threat to our economy, if nothing else, and becoming more threatening. What can our Congress do about it? Senator Marco Rubio is a Republican representing the state of Florida, and he joins us tonight. Senator, thanks a lot for coming on. You just wrote what I thought was a really interesting op-ed about China, and you have this line in here, which I think all of our viewers should be familiar with, and I'm quoting you. Chinese theft of American intellectual property alone cost the U.S. nearly $600 billion annually, eclipsing the combined profits of the top 50 companies in last year's Fortune 500 list. That's a remarkable number. Why is no one doing anything about that?
You know, for the same reason that this is an issue that surprised me. You know, for years I kind of been a traditionalist on it all, thinking, like most people did, that eventually it would all work out, they'd become more democratic. And then I started getting involved in the human rights issues in China, and that led me to kind of understand the broader plan they have in place. And this is not an economic plan on their part or a development plan. This is a plan to undermine not just our competitiveness, but the competitiveness of every country in the world and become the dominant nation, the dominant economic, industrial, and technological power. And they're using multiple tools, including intellectual property theft, to do that. So not only are they undermining our industrial base, they are also undermining our technological base through something called Made in China 2025, where they intend not just to supplant America, but all countries on Earth and the West, in automobiles and passenger aircraft, in quantum computing and artificial intelligence. They've laid out the entire industries, and they're slowly but surely carrying out this plan.
So this is a threat, obviously not simply to our economy, but to our predominance around the world, to our power and to our values. Why are American industries not saying more about this?
Some of them are starting to. Some of them are making some money over there. And, you know, when CEOs, many of these multinational corporations, they consider themselves to be citizens of the world, these CEOs are going to be gone in 8 years. They don't feel, many of them don't feel any special obligation to the United States. They feel an obligation to maximize return for shareholders. And as a result, if they've got a good thing going over there making money, who cares if they're stealing technology and in 10 years the company won't even be able to compete with them? It's working out in the short term, and that makes them look good. So that's a part of it. Others are beginning to complain, but they're afraid to say so because they don't want to get kicked out. Just the other day we heard two airlines, United and American, are being told that unless they stop defining Taiwan as a country, they no longer will be able to fly there. I mean, they're threatening them with hundreds of flights and billions of dollars in revenue. Marriott fired an American worker about 6 months ago because the worker put up a tweet, or liked a tweet about Tibet, and they fired an American over a tweet that the guy put up by mistake. So that's what's happening, and so we've got a bill that addresses it, and if I could briefly walk through the 5 points on it, because they're important. Number one, we would prohibit the transfer. Yeah, we would prohibit the transfer of any and all technologies that are sensitive, things like quantum computing and biosciences and artificial intelligence and the like. The second thing we would do is we would place a tax basically on excess Chinese investment in the United States. How that works basically, they come, let's say they buy $10 billion of Fortune 500 stocks. That will raise the price of the stock. That will issue revenues, dividends. They then take that dividend money and they use it to buy U.S. treasuries, which increases the price of the dollar, the value of the dollar, thereby making American exports more expensive than a Chinese export, thereby destroying our capacity. And so this is not economic development on their part. This is a strategic use of investment as a weapon to undermine our production capacity. We would also put a tax on American companies entering joint ventures with Chinese companies, because what they do is they make you partner with them, and then they steal your technology, your intellectual property, and all of a sudden they become your global competitor, they kick you out, and they put our companies out of business. And these are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at and in this bill to put in place to even the playing field. Let me just say this. This is not an economic issue. This is not a trade issue. This is not a tariff issue. This is the single most important geopolitical issue of the last 100 years. It will define what the 21st century turns out to be.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm grateful that you're saying this. I'm a little baffled why more people aren't saying it, but I hope they will after hearing you say it. So thank you, Senator. Good to see you. All right. A member of Congress is demanding that the U.S. government confiscate by force guns from law-abiding Americans. What would happen if the government tried that? That's next. Well, you've heard the line about 1 million times at this point. Nobody wants to take your guns away. Settle down, paranoid nutcase tinfoil hat Alex Jones guy. Gun control advocates simply want common sense reforms to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill. Ordinary citizens who've done nothing wrong have nothing to fear from their government. So they always tell you, and you knew this, but now it's confirmed, they were lying. In an op-ed published today, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, a frequent guest on this show, called for banning all so-called assault weapons, which he, of course, did not define, and then seizing those weapons from millions of gun owners by force. So the cat is out of the bag on that question. John Summers was communications director for Senator Harry Reid, and he joins us tonight. So, John, I guess I've been saying this for a couple of years now and have been dismissed as a paranoid lunatic, which, by the way, I'm not. I always assume the best. But this is the only way you're ever, if you believe crime is caused by guns, you've got to get rid of the guns. You're wrong, but that you wind up where Swalwell now admits he is. So can't we just be honest about this debate? They're trying to take our guns away by force.
I am all about having this honest debate, because what I think you have found is one of the more extreme examples. The reality is that most Democrats, the vast majority of Democrats, and the vast majority of people who are in the gun violence prevention movement don't feel that way. What they actually want to do is meet the rest of the American public where we already are. 90% of Americans believe in expanding background checks to all gun sales and other common sense reforms. I think most Americans also agree with the notion that we shouldn't have weapons of war on our streets. Now, I think where you lose the discussion is when you start talking about taking guns out of people's homes.
Well, look, the truth is, again, if you believe that guns cause crime, you're not familiar with the data, which show the opposite. But if you believe that, if that's the premise of your position, then you have to tell me what you're going to do with the hundreds of millions of guns currently in the possession of law-abiding Americans. Those guns are not going away. They last virtually forever. You have to get rid of them, if that's what you believe. Don't you?
And I think that's what Representative Swalwell is proposing, but I think that's a difficult argument to have, because I don't think that's where the American public is at. I don't think that's where the majority of...
But hold on, right, because you don't want to say it out. Well, you're right, absolutely. People are horrified when you tell the truth, and Swalwell, for whatever reason, chose to. By the way, he's not an extremist.
No, actually, you know what people are horrified by, Tucker? What people are horrified by the 96 gun deaths that take place in this country every single day. And by the way, the vast majority of those deaths aren't caused by assault weapons. They're actually caused, we have 96 of these tragedies that play out every single day in people's homes.
But it's not a contest to see who can be more upset by violence
by expanding background checks to all gun sales.
Okay. But what do you do? Look, I am every bit as upset by people dying as you are. The question is not who's a better person, who has a bigger heart. My solution is to ask an honest question, which is, why is this happening? There are a lot of potential factors here. Fewer American households have guns than had 50 years ago. The guns haven't changed. They're not more effective than they used to be. The calibers are the same. And yet we have mass shootings. Why is that? It's not the guns aren't doing it. Well, just because I have a hammer in my house doesn't build a house for me. I mean, like, it's insane, actually.
Well, you can thank background checks for actually... You can thank background checks for actually helping to reduce gun violence, because background checks have blocked the sales of 3 million sales of guns to people who shouldn't have them in the first place.
I'm not arguing against background. We have background checks, so actually.
Right, and the majority of people want to expand those background checks into online gun sales.
But hold on.
Most of them aren't in the area where Swalwell is.
But what you're saying, what I find so, and I'll be honest, infuriating about what you're saying is, you know that I'm right, that in the end the goal is to take the guns away. You have to if you believe what you believe, but you don't want to say it because you know most Americans would find it terrifying. That law-abiding
I actually
people
know that you're
wrong,
for the
crimes
Tucker.
Of criminals.
having worked with many influential members of Democrats in both houses on Capitol Hill, and having worked directly in the gun violence prevention movement, I can tell you, you are absolutely wrong. That we want to see smart, common sense gun violence.
Okay, but stop with the propaganda language, the smart, common sense, whatever. That's just poll-tested junk. I want to know, like, what the actual solution is. So you leave the hundreds of millions of guns in people's households. You never bother people. They can leave them to their kids. They can sell them to their neighbors. They can basically do what they do now with them. You don't want to change any of that.
I think we've talked about making a lot of changes, including expanding background checks to online gun sales. In terms of what happens
that's negligible. Very few guns are sold online. I mean, let's be adults here. Come on, that's silly.
Well,
Is it okay? No, it's true. I know the numbers. I know a lot about this. No guns are sold online.
And where do you think people go who can't pass a background check? Where do you think they go to buy their guns? Gun shows and online, where they don't have to go through any sort of a background check.
This is just a
Doesn't
negligible
matter whether
percentage.
they're domestic abusers
You're not answering
or violent felons.
You're not answering my question. Just answer my question, fact-based question, which is, these guns exist, these so-called assault rifles, these scary guns. What do we do with them? We just let them remain in circulation forever? Is that your plan, yes or no?
That's certainly not my plan.
Oh. So I think you actually agree with Swalwell, and I think you know that you do. You just don't want to say it. So when you're ready to be honest, come on back. Thanks, John. Good to see you. The Boy Scouts have changed their name. That's not just a cosmetic change. It's one part of a national attack on masculinity. We'll discuss the implications of that attack next. Well, the Boy Scouts, as the Boy Scouts, ceased to exist yesterday. The century-old group is now Scouts BSA. The new gender-neutral name is designed to reflect the group's new openness to admitting girls. The Boy Scouts going co-ed eliminates one of the last healthy all-male groups open to young men. Given that young men are really struggling in this country, what are the implications of this, if any? Tammy Bruce is a radio host. She thinks deeply about changes to American society, and so we wanted to ask her view. How you doing, Tammy?
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I've got a bunch of girls, and I love them, and I want what's best for them. And so, you know, joining the Boy Scouts is good for them. I'm for that. But I really worry that there aren't many places where boys can be boys, where they're not under attack for being boys. And I always thought of the Boy Scouts as one of those places, and now it isn't that. So should I be worried?
Well, I think that this does not indicate that that's the case, I think, really. Let's keep in mind this is about also perhaps declining membership. In the 70s, the Boy Scouts had like 5 million members. They've gone down about 12% since 2012. They're at about 2.3 million now. So this is also, we want the Boy Scouts to survive. They've been instrumental in the strength of the country, in creating leaders in government, in science, in space travel. We need them. And I think that what's happening here, certainly in the 21st century, is that, and maybe the Boy Scouts can show us the way, that this can still be categories and events and projects and an overarching view about the strength of boys and the importance of those relationships, that boys with boys and the nature of the strength of what young men do, while also being able to weave in young women. And in their plans, what I've read is that these will be separate programs. While it's changing to Scouts, the overarching name remains Boy Scouts of America. And look, I think that this is also part of the Boy Scout framework about being able to help the nation in general. And I think we're at a stage where for the young women who want to have this kind of great experience, keep in mind the Girl Scouts really aren't offering that now. It's more about a social justice warrior framework. And they're missing out on this dynamic. And I think that if the parents stay involved, the volunteers are involved, and Americans make it clear that girls probably want to join because they want the same experience and at least the character building, certainly, that the Boy Scouts offer.
Interesting. So you're more optimistic about this than I am. Well, just wonder, in 2018, could you have an all-male group that wasn't derided as anti-female, and that wasn't, in fact, anti-female?
No.
I mean, you can have a single-sex organization that's not mad at the other sex, obviously.
Sure, sure.
Do we have room for that in our society?
Well, we should, obviously, and just because the left doesn't like it doesn't mean that we have to adapt and accept their point of view about what's wrong. And this is my worry about the slippery slope, is that, look, I think it's good, it can be managed, but you know what the left is going to do? They're then going to argue that, well, you're not treating the girls equally. If these are separate projects, separate experiences, that they're going to start to sue to change the principled base of the Boy Scouts. Now, look, if you want social justice warring, you can join the Girl Scouts. But we already have 3,000 girls who've joined the Cub Scouts because that's what's interesting these young women and their parents. So we've got to stay in touch with this. But we've got to be able to do it. There's nothing that we can do that's going to stop the left from complaining, and we've got to make sure that we push back and stand up for groups like the Boy Scouts that make the difference in this country.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. You made me feel a little better. Tammy, thank you.
Good, good. Thank you, dear.
Time next for Final Exam. Stay tuned. Time Time now for Final Exam, where our news experts compete to see who is the best at recalling the events that they covered just this week. This week's contestants, Bree Payton, staff writer at The Federalist, and Fox News correspondent Griff Jenkins, who, as you can see, has been gravely injured in the pursuit of his duties as a Fox News correspondent. Somehow we're not going to ask questions. I hope you're okay, Griff. All right. Great to see you both. I am hosting from an undisclosed location with the judges present, so if there's any question at all, they're right here outside of camera shot to advise me. You know the rules, but for our viewers at home who may not remember them, they are these. Hands on buzzers. I ask the questions. The first one to buzz in gets to answer the question. You have to wait until I finish asking it before you answer. Every correct answer is worth 1 point. Each incorrect detracts a point from your total. Best of 5 wins. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Yes, let's go.
Perfect. Question 1. Which Swedish pop supergroup just announced it is getting back together after 35 years to make new music, but say they are unsure whether their songs are any good?
ABBA.
Ah, Griff Jenkins, ABBA. Did the Swedish supergroup give it away? Let's check the tape.
ABBA is making a comeback.
Awesome.
You are the dancing queen, young and sweet, only 17. The Swedish band announcing their decision to release new songs and a virtual tour after 35 years.
I can't wait to go see them in concert.
They're filled with self-doubt. I love that. We're not sure our music's any good. Good job. Griff Jenkins up 1. Question 2. This is a multiple choice question. Hillary Clinton found yet a new group to blame for her loss in the 2016 election. Which group is it? Is it A, the Socialists, B, the Vegans, or C, the Satanic Temple?
Those are good choices.
Which group is Hillary blaming?
I'm going to go with the
Bree Payton.
Socialists.
You think she's blaming the Socialists?
I think
not the
she
Vegans?
is. Yeah.
Let's see if you're right.
If you're in the Iowa caucuses and 41% of Democrats are socialists or self-described socialists, and I'm asked, are you a capitalist? And I say yes, you know, that probably gets lost in the, oh my gosh, she's a capitalist.
She's definitely a capitalist, that's for sure. Bree Payton, nice job. So it's 1-1. You versus the injured Griff Jenkins. Okay, question 3. Nearly 10 years ago, George W. Bush was making his farewell visit to Iraq when a man, you may remember this, took off his shoes and threw them at President Bush. The man who threw those shoes is now embarking on a brand new career. What is it?
Boy, I could guess that one, but I would be afraid
you have to hit the
do so.
buzzer before guessing it with your good arm.
I'm not going to go in. Go for it.
A new career for the shoe thrower. Think about it. What's a natural career? There you go, Bree Payton.
I'm going to guess he's going to be like a PE coach or like a baseball little league, something where he has to throw things with children.
Baseball coach, little league, something from the sporting world where he has to throw things. To the tape we go.
Monsadr al-Zaidi. He is a man that took 9 months in prison for deciding on George Bush's farewell tour through Iraq, a place in which you were present, to pick up his shoes, take them off his feet, and throw them at the president. The president showing great reactions. He is now going to be running for office. In case you want to know the position, he's running for the Council of Representatives.
I love, by the way, Tucker, that you have a throwing, an arm throwing question in there, by the way.
Of course, not to make you feel bad, Griff. The guy has no self-control and he's badly dressed. A politician, of course.
Well,
all
should have guessed it.
Question 4. At an event this week, the French president had some trouble with his English being French. Which word did he accidentally use, or they're claiming it was accidental, to describe the wife of the Australian Prime Minister?
Delicious.
Griff Jenkins. Delicious. Come on now, that's vulgar. Delicious, is that really your guess?
I'm going with delicious.
Let's roll the tape.
I wanted to thank you for your welcome. Thank you and your delicious wife for your warm welcome. The perfect organization of this trip. Thanks to you and Lucy. Thank you very much.
Brady's looking at me like, did he just say that? It's true. I remember that.
There's nothing accidental about that. Accidental. No, he's just French. He means it. All right, final question. This wouldn't be Final Exam without an animal question. It's tradition. A video going around the internet this week shows an Australian man knocked off his paddleboard vigorously by what variety of sea animal?
A dolphin. A dolphin.
A dolphin. Dolphins, they seem too
right.
nice for that. Let's see if the tape proves you right.
Dolphin danger. An unsuspecting paddleboarder gets the surprise of a lifetime when a dolphin leaps out of the waves and knocks him into the surf.
I love I lose on a surfing question. That's really hurts.
It is exactly right. A dolphin. And as a surfer, you know, Griff, that's unusual. Dolphins don't do anything by accident. They didn't like that guy.
He had bad form.
Griff Jenkins, you win 2-1. Bree, you did a fantastic job, but I know for sympathy's sake, you let Griff have it, and we're glad you did. That was kind.
She did.
Thank you both. And if I were there, I will give you the victory mug when I see you next week. Griff Jenkins, Bree Payton, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this week's Final Exam. Tune in carefully to the news each and every day until next Thursday and see if you've accumulated enough knowledge to beat the experts. We'll be right back.